one-stop shop for great wrestling. It's the WrestleCopia Podcast Network. Ray Russell brings a host of great shows right to your device. There's the Wrestling Memory Grenade, Regional Wrestling, the Wrestling Stoop with Bob Roop, the Amazing Puro Academy Show, Retro Wrestling Review with Gene Jackson, Dave Dynasty's long-running hit, Wrestling Nostalgia, Monday Warfare, Raw vs. Nitro, the hilarious Other Ship podcast, and a whole lot more. Great shows and great guests, but where do you find all this stuff? Really simple. Try logging on to WrestleCopia.com. As I like to say, it's your one-stop shop for great wrestling memories. Hey everybody, welcome to the Outdated Wrestling Hour. Our guest this time, author James Dixon of Inside the Ropes, and his new book, Titan Shrinking. It's part of a new trilogy. I know all about shrinking. In my prime as a strapping buck, I was about 6'1". Now I'm 4'11". I don't understand how these things happen. I asked my wife, Lillibred, I said, how do these things happen? She said, that's not the only thing that's shrinking on you. It's the Outdated Wrestling Hour. When are them mail-order pills going to arrive? Welcome back, everyone, to the Outdated Wrestling Hour podcast. My name is Bob Smith. You may remember me. Jesus, nobody remembers me, but you may remember me from when I was with all those wrestling magazines like Pro Wrestling Illustrated back in the 80s and 90s. The co-host of our soiree is the leader of GenerationXWire.com, the entertainment website with stuff you won't read anywhere else. It's Joe Puccio. Joe, welcome back, sir.
Bob, at the very least, everybody remembers you from last week's podcast. Is
that
right?
Maybe. Yeah, could be.
I mean, but don't sell yourself
I don't know
short.
how else to introduce myself. I feel it's necessary for newcomers to mention my resume. I just, first of all, I have the least exciting name ever given to a child. I still don't forgive my parents. If they named me Grocery Bag Smith, it would have been more exciting than Bob. All right?
Yeah, but some people prefer that. Like, would you rather have a name like Bob Smith?
Anything.
Or would you rather have a name that was so out there that was hard to pronounce and that you couldn't spell it? What would you rather have?
I defer you to George Carlin, who in one of his bits in the 70s said, George is one of those names that, or it's like, I don't have one of those names that helps you get lucky just from the sound of your name. And then you hear this, boo-boo. Who's there? Tito, Chico, and George. Tell George to wait.
Right.
It's just, it doesn't impress you. Well, I got this guy, Bob Smith, looking for a job, and I also have Bartholomew Simmons. Bring in Bartholomew. Seriously, I think it's been a detriment. I mean, I'm going into the music business at one point. It can't be Bob Smith. What? Who?
Yeah.
It just doesn't work. It's not exciting. I may be one of the most exciting, male specimens of the last part of the 20th century. No, I'm not. No.
Look,
in all seriousness, it's a dull name. It's all.
I always, hey, look, my first name is pretty common. You can't get much more common than Joe, right? Joe Schmo. But I mean, as far as my last name,
no, Puccio's exciting.
No. I'm talking about my first name. My last name, I love. I love my last name. The only problem I've ever had with it is because it's an ethnic name. It's an Italian name. If you're not I've run through since I was a kid in school is that if you don't know how to pronounce Italian names, you screw it up. So I've always had teachers calling out, doing the roll call, and they screw it up. And, you can probably use your imagination, things that they call it. So that's been my only thing, is that people just don't know how to pronounce it. I think now nowadays I feel like it's a little bit more common and people are a little bit more, cognizant of how to say it. But that was always my thing. But yeah, other than that, yeah, I do like that I have, a not so generic last name. I like my name. But as far as my first name, yeah, it's the same thing. It's pretty common. There were times when I used to say, "Oh, I wish I had a little bit more of, I don't know, like a little bit more of an unusual first name, something that, not as many people have." But again, I mean, it could be a lot of people say the opposite, right? If you have a name that's hard to pronounce or hard to spell, or what the hell is that? That's your name, So it's always the same way, right? You look at both sides.
Many times people find out my name, and then halfway through the conversation, they call me Bill because the name is so bland. They forget what it was, but they know it's plain.
Right.
I've been called Bill Jones a lot.
Yeah.
I'm telling you, it's either. What was this plain name? Bill Jones, right? No, Bob Smith. Oh yeah, sorry about that.
Same thing, right?
Yeah, it's the same thing. Look, I'm complaining about nothing. I'm a lucky dude. Anyway, welcome to the show. We have a lot of wrestling this time. Our guest is James Dixon, who you may know from Inside the Ropes magazine, and he's going to be here talking about his brand new book. The first part of two 3-part trilogies on the WWF. And Joe, if you haven't read these books, they're real good. They're real good. It's if these got by you, and they got by me, I'll tell you that. I didn't hear of the man until about 6 months ago. And I checked out the new book. It's real good. It's a really good summing up of 1992. And each of the books in the series tackles a different period, a different subject, or a different year. Okay. So it's real good.
I'm usually up on a lot of the more current wrestling books, but I'll completely admit I was not aware of this book or the series of books either until, we spoke about it a little bit. But I'm definitely intrigued because I'm sure we'll talk about a little the years that he's covering are interesting years, to say the least. A lot of good, a lot of bad. But it's interesting because, again, those are years that you don't really, well, I mean, 92 specifically, I mean, you don't really hear a lot about somebody covering that year. Generally it's going to be years in the 80s when they expanded. Mm-hmm. And then other than that, you've kind of fast forward to the Attitude Era, the late 90s. But you don't hear too many people doing a whole book on 1992.
Well, the previous trilogy, the first 3 books were Titan Sinking, Titan Shattered, and Titan Screwed. All go. Right. Now, the first one in the new series is Titan Shrinking, How Wrestling's Muscle Lost Its Power. And that could mean 100 different things. I'm not going to telegraph it. Not for you or the listeners. I just think, I had an opportunity. He sent me a galley, and I'll tell you what, it was really interesting stuff. It's a good source, a good writer, and it's just interesting to go back in time like that. So anyway, before we get started with all that, and we will talk about, Joe and I are going to talk about 1992, but before we start, as we sit down to record this, it is November 16th, and we just learned that Bob Caudle has died. The fantastic, never heard a bad word about him, multi-generational TV announcer who specialized in pro wrestling, everything from the NWA to Smoky Mountain. The nicest man you'll ever meet, and also, nobody ever complained about his play-by-play. I never met anybody. Joe, how do you feel about it?
Yeah, I agree. He had such a long career as well. And, I'm one of the guys that probably was most introduced to him more than any other period. It was during the Smoky Mountain years. Mm-hmm. Because again, I know he had a huge career, obviously way long before that. But for me, watching him all the time, I was a big tape trader in the day, and I used to get the Smoky Mountain tapes, maybe, I don't know, every couple of months. I used to get a bunch of the tapes and watch them, and I was really into that product. And he was the lead guy there. And that's when I really first got to realize how good he was. And then, of course, going back, watching the old NWA and the Mid-Atlantic stuff that he really made his name for himself. But I definitely wouldn't sleep on his work with Smoky Mountain. If you remember that, I mean, he did a hell of a job getting over that product.
He did, and him and Dutch Mantel blended like peanut butter and jelly, man. It was good. I go back with him. My favorite work that I heard him do was on one of the syndicated shows for the NWA, and he did a lot of TBS stuff too. Mm-hmm. And one time he did a show with Gordon Solie. Both of them did a pay-per-view, and I thought it was excellent. Meat and potatoes, both of them. A whole host of knowledge between the two of them, and just Bob made you feel comfortable. I don't know how else to put it. He just made you feel comfortable. He wasn't putting on airs. He was there to solely talk about the wrestlers and the angles and what was going on. It was never, he was never developing a comedy persona.
Right.
He was as straight-laced as your second grade teacher, and in a way that was very comforting because he's never going to lie to you. Right? So
Yeah.
I just think he was great. He was absolutely fantastic. Obviously on the all-time top 10 of TV announcers for wrestling. Worked everywhere. Everybody loved the guy that I know. I never heard a bad word spoken about him. So I just want to give our appreciation for Bob Caudle and reach out, through our meager little podcast here to his family and friends and just say we're really sorry about this and it's a great loss. 95 years old, a nice run though.
Definitely a nice run. Like you said, I've always heard, never met the man, but I've always heard he was a class act. Never heard anything bad about him. I know he was married. I believe his wife just passed away this year as well, from what I was reading earlier. But I
Yeah,
think
that's
they were
true.
married something like, I think they were married. I think I read 75 or 76 years or something like that, believe it or not. So what a run for him. And, he even had an appearance in the last few years. You remember he was on the Ric Flair
That is right.
retirement show, right? I think he did something. What did he call that match? I know he did something on the show. It might have been that match, or he was definitely on the show. I remember seeing him in there on
I
it.
will fess up that I've never seen the show.
Oh, you didn't see it? Okay.
No, I
Well, I
didn't see
saw
it.
that match, and I do remember seeing clips. And I know he was on at least the beginning of the show. I saw clips of him. So talk about a run there. I mean, at that age. And what was
Yeah.
that, 3 years ago that Flair
Yeah.
did that? So I mean, that
Yeah.
was recent.
And Bob had a very, very long broadcasting career before he started with wrestling. I was pointing at the show before that he was a host of a puppet show at one point with a wisecracking dog puppet. And
That's
so
great.
he did kids shows. I'm sure he did news in there somewhere
Yeah,
along the
yeah.
line. It just you can all look it up, but all I know is he wasn't the largest man, but he was a giant in pro wrestling. Bob Caudle. You can't get any better. You
Yeah.
cannot get any better than Bob Caudle. You can't. I did meet him a couple of times. He's just, hey, how are you? Just the same as you think
Regular
he would
guy.
be.
Yeah, yeah.
Regular guy. You gotta love it. Oh man. The more I think about it, the bigger the loss it becomes. It really does. You know what? Because we're not getting that type anymore to do
Exactly.
wrestling announcing. It's all hype, 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 yell, 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 faux excitement. He never had to do that. He just had to tell you what was going on.
Agreed.
Miss it like crazy. All right, now that we've paid our respects to Bob and everybody he knows, the new book that our guest, again, it's called From James Dixon, Titan Shrinking, How Wrestling's Muscle Lost Its Power, and it focuses on 1992. And on my own, I just sat down and didn't hardly have to research it. A lot of it's off the top of my head about what a weird and strange, and I think bad year 1992 was for the WWE, because I was at PWA at that time and I saw half houses at Madison Square Garden. Every day you'd pick up something and there'd be more bad news behind the scenes. It was really rough. I mean, that was the Phil Donahue year, everything. I mean, it was just, oh man, bad news every day. So I don't have a lot of fond memories of it, and including the product. But I know that Joe Puccio has a slightly different take on it, which is fine. Joe, why do you look back at it with more fondness than I do?
So yeah, it's an interesting year for sure. Like I just said, a few minutes ago, it's probably not fondly remembered, I would say, by the majority of fans our age, fans that were into the WWF in the 80s during the glory years when they first expanded. To me, though, I definitely don't hate the year in WWF for a couple of reasons. One, it was the year I think that both Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels sort of really started their rise as main event players on the single scene. Of course, they both were in their tag teams before that in the late 80s, and you had the Hart Foundation, the Midnight Rockers. But I think 92 was that first year, especially Bret Hart. I think because it was really Bret first. Bret Hart really his career started really transitioning into that main event player that we all knew. And if you remember, 92 was the year of the Bret Hart, Davey Boy Smith SummerSlam match at Wembley Stadium, which was like 80,000 fans. That was at the SummerSlam in 92. And one of the greatest matches ever. And you just mentioned PWI. I could be wrong. You would be more obviously the authority on this, but I think it was the match of the year.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
No
for back
question.
then. Yeah.
No question. It was, I dare say, if you go past the Hackenschmidt era and cut that
Mhm.
off to like the more modernized pro wrestling,
Yeah.
it's one of the top 10 matches of all time, still in my eyes, because again, a top 10 match to me means more than just, oh, they were really good. It means the effect it had on the business afterwards.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And like Hogan Andre obviously had a big effect on the business. And I think in many ways that match did too, because we went from all the cartoony stuff to
Mhm.
this great athletic thing that drew people and people were wildly passionate about. The exact opposite of what they were hyping all year long. And
Yeah.
I'll tell you what, important that it happened because things started changing at that point for the better.
You're right. In a lot of ways, that match, a lot of people look to that specific match as one of the factors that really changed everything. Obviously, there's a lot more that goes into it, but I feel like that match was a big part of it. And you want to know something too? I mean, you said not from the Hackenschmidt days, and was there a match that good or that notable? And I even think that match went above and beyond, even like up until that point. I guess the Savage Steamboat match in '87 was considered the holy grail of matches. Everybody looked at that match in '87 and said, "Oh my God, this was the greatest match." And then by the time you get to 1992 and you got Hart and Smith in that match, I mean, look, it's all a matter of taste, but I think that Hart and Smith match took things to a completely different level. Not only was it better athletically, but I mean, the emotion in that match, being at Wembley Stadium, and you talk about it's not just about the moves, it's about the emotion, it's about the feeling, and I mean the families there. I mean, that was really something.
You know what people forget? It was only for the Intercontinental title.
Exactly, and
It
it main
wasn't even for the
evented,
world
right?
title.
I
What's
think it
that?
was the last match, wasn't it?
Yeah,
Yeah, it
of
was
course.
it was the match. Yeah, but it
It
wasn't
was the
the world
headlining
title.
match.
Yeah,
Well, it's because the conquering local boy came home.
right,
They made it the main event, and the Intercontinental title was almost secondary. They
right,
just wanted to see Davey Boy win, and they got it.
and they
And the
got it.
place went bananas. I'll never forget that. It was like you're right, somebody flipped a switch. Somebody had a good idea. Bret Hart's brilliance couldn't be denied by 1992.
Yep.
He if all started, what was it, a Royal Rumble where he lasted an hour or 45 minutes or something, people said, "Wow." And I remember Dave Rosenbaum, one of our writers, wrote in his column, "Is he the best wrestler in WWF?"
Yeah,
That
yeah,
was the first line in the thing, because it wasn't the fact that he lasted that long in that match. He was so good in that match.
exactly.
And it was the first time he really had an opportunity to show it off by himself, not as part of a tag team. Yeah, real important match. I mean, it changed things for the better. Now that we've gone from the sublime, let's go to the ridiculous. I have a short compilation here. I'm holding it in my hand. I never take notes, but I took notes this time of the stuff that went down in the WWF in just this one year.
Oh boy.
It's overwhelming.
Yeah.
I'm surprised they survived that year. I really am. First of all, Hogan left that year. Then they had a vacant world title. The Ultimate Warrior got fired for reasons I'm pretty sure he failed the test or something. Allegedly, I'll say. Okay, the British Bulldog left.
Mm-hmm.
All right. The whiffs of the steroid scandal were still going on. It was still being talked about left, right, and sideways. Marty Jannetty got busted out there for doing something. Sid Justice failed the drug test. And this all made the news. This was a different landscape for wrestling. Small stuff like that would make local area newspapers and things like that. So all this bad stuff is going on. So what does Vince McMahon and company do? And I don't think Pat Patterson was there at this point. I don't think maybe Bruce Pritchard was there at this point. So Vince running amok, right, brings us Papa Shango, right? And listen, Charles Wright is a good wrestler and a great guy. He really is. He's a jewel. He's a wonderful guy. Papa Shango was a gigantic mistake. And the way it was brought about, to the cartoony aspect of it, to the Ultimate Warrior puking and dripping goo from his head and
Yeah,
all
yeah,
this
yeah.
others, and the preliminary wrestlers' boots are catching fire in the ring for no reason. It was just awful. Then Hawk from the Road Warriors, or from the Illusion of Doom, excuse me, he fails a drug test, leading to a change in the title to the cartoon IRS and Ted DiBiase, so that didn't really make things better. Kerry Von Erich was in the news for allegedly, and I'll say allegedly because I don't really know how these things. I'm an old newsman. I don't want to report things that weren't 100%, but I'm pretty sure this is true. But I'll say he allegedly forged prescriptions.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Then we had Nails make his debut. beating up the big boss man for what felt like 45 minutes straight on a show that was geared for 11 o'clock in the morning on Saturdays. An
Yeah.
ugly, ugly moment in WWF history. It was just over the top, violent, and I don't think the fans were conditioned for it because it was jarring to watch. I thought it was jarring to watch and too much, and I can't imagine what children at home were thinking when they were watching that. So then the Legion of Doom meets Rocco in a garbage pile. I can't make this stuff up. Then you had a wonderful lady who I've gotten to know the last couple of years, Rita Chatterton, Rita Marie, the
Yep.
referee,
Sure.
on 2 different Geraldo Rivera shows, accuses Vince McMahon of allegedly doing things to her that he shouldn't have done. I think eventually that was settled out of court or something like that, but that it wasn't a nice thing to find out about. Then you had the Phil Donahue show, about the Ring Boys and Murray Hodgson, the announcer, and Barry Orton complaining about this and that, and, the Pat Patterson and Garvin getting lambasted left, right, and sideways. But the last thing I wrote about, the best thing, the emergence of Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels. It changed the fact that things were, and they were smaller guys. The beauty part is that it wasn't the big muscled steroid guys, number one. Number two, these guys could wrestle for an hour. Nobody else there could do it. Nobody else there could do it. And things got a little more serious, a little more sports orientated, a little more gritty like it used to be. They were wrestling for a realistic reason.
Yeah.
Not you ran me over with a car or something. It was real good stuff. However, with all the stuff I just read, and there's lots I left out, to me, 1992, to work at Peterborough and cover this stuff, I felt like I was on police blotter at my first newspaper job, not at a wrestling magazine. And it really, really hurt. It hurt. We were all looking at each other every day. Bill Apter would get off the phone and say, this happened, that happened, this happened. And we're all looking at each other like, when is this going to stop?
Yeah.
Seriously, when was it going to stop? It eventually did, but it tainted our enjoyment of what we were doing. I really did.
Yeah.
I remember swinging around, like I always say, for one of these things, and swinging around Andy Rodriguez and Craig Peters. I go, why am I covering this? Why am I wasting my time? This is not what I grew up watching. Things did get better, but it was frustrating at the time. And you know what? Look at it from my point of view as a publishing employee. Sales were down because of it. It was killing all of us. Magazine sales were just at the moment all this was going on. Things started to go downhill.
Yeah.
And it started around 88, but by 92 it was epidemic.
Yeah.
So I don't know what to say other than it was hurting not only the WWF business, but all the peripheral businesses around it who had anything to do with wrestling.
I mean, look, a couple, several of the points you made. If you're looking at the bad, yes. So business wise, there's no denying that, like you just said. I mean, it started to sort of trickle down a few years before that. And then by 92, 93, that's when business really started getting bad. They were drawing less and there weren't as many fans. And, we all know about this. So I'll completely grant you that. That's obvious. But from a product standpoint, yes, there was, I always say in 92, 2 of the gimmicks you just mentioned that were pretty bad that year, Papa Shango and Rocco the Dummy for the Legion of Doom. Yes, those were probably the 2 low points in the WWF that year. However, to me, the good product and the good segments that went on that year should be measured equally, that those were just as important. The Royal Rumble that year, probably the greatest Royal Rumble. It's my favorite Rumble, and I think a lot of people would agree. That was the year that Flair won, of course, and that was the year that Bobby Heenan was on commentary doing that stellar job, as he always did. Another gimmick that was born that year that we didn't touch on that I would say was very successful, Razor Ramon. Scott Hall entered the WWF that year with the Razor Ramon gimmick, and we know that was really, really successful for them, for many, many years. And I just feel like, and even the barbershop angle, that was the whole gimmick with Michaels and Jannetty.
That started the year pretty much.
Yeah.
But you know what, though? You mentioned the angles that went over, but how about Jacques Rougeau as the Mountie?
The Mountie.
No, let me keep going. How about Barry Darsow as Repo Man?
Yeah. No,
How
I
about
get you.
Mike Rotundo, all of a sudden a renegade tax attorney called IRS?
Yeah,
How about Steve Kern becoming Skinner, which, the beauty part about his character, that was really him.
I know.
He
Yeah,
was a real Skinner,
that
so
was like him.
that's
I
the only
know.
one that made sense, and also, we talked about Shango and Nails, but Rick Martel became the model.
Yeah. You know what?
Forgive me for not being excited about any of that
Yeah.
stuff.
No, I get you. And like I said, I'm not arguing with you on those points. There was a lot of bad with the good, but I guess my whole point is that I don't know. I just always felt that people were a little bit more down on that year and those years that followed it, those few years. And, that's fine because of a lot of the crap that went on. And I've always felt that they were a little underrated because of the reasons we just talked about, the Bret Hart, the Michaels, and the Royal Rumble and all that. And then you look at, let's just fast forward to like when they first started getting business picked up again, which was like, what, 98, 99, the Attitude Era. There was a lot of garbage those years as well.
Oh, yeah.
And, there was a lot like I think people look at those years with rose-colored glasses as if those were like the greatest years ever in the modern WWE, and they really weren't. There was
No, they
just as
weren't.
much crap,
Yep.
So
Just a different kind of crap.
and you talk about like all the terrible scandals, the sex scandals, the drug scandals from the early 90s that really started years before that. And, if you want to kind of make it equal, look at the Attitude Era. Those were the years where we started having the deaths of, you had the deaths of guys like uh, Eddie Guerrero and of course the Chris Benoit, which was an event all in and of itself. But
Yeah,
I mean, you
yeah.
have the guys like that who started. You had the deaths and stuff. So I mean, I just
I
think
mean,
it's always going to be good and bad that you can look for any of the periods. And I guess my point mainly is that yes, I completely agree with you. There was a lot of garbage in '92. But I feel like there was also a lot that we shouldn't just overlook because of this, all this other stuff. And a lot of it was behind the scenes. Like you said, the Donahue show, the scandals and the guys failing drug tests and the guys, of course we know about that.
you buy a box of cornflakes, store brand cornflakes, okay?
Mhm.
And it all looks great. And as you're dumping the cornflakes out into your cereal bowl, first thing in a sunny morning, a mouse falls into your bowl. Now, do you eat the rest of the cornflakes? No, you throw the whole box away and complain to the manager at the store. Now,
Mhm.
I put it to you. It's 1992. I'm watching the Mountie take a cattle prod and zap it into somebody's arm or something like that. Zap, 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 zap.
Right.
And I'm thinking, how can I take the championship series after all this cartoonery?
Yeah. Yeah.
How can I take it as serious, as important when, the Ultimate Warrior is in a vignette backstage puking all over a team of doctors? You know what I'm saying?
No, of
It
course.
taints You have to look at the entire box of cornflakes.
Yeah.
And it made it not as appealing. I mean, listen, I had to watch every show. I was recovering it one way or another. We used to do write-ups too of all the pay-per-views, and we used to time the matches and all the holds and all. It was like the Observer still does. You get a
Mhm.
complete blow by blow. We put it in the magazines. We'd have let's say it was a pay-per-view. We'd do an article on the pay-per-view, and it would be
Mhm.
just like sitting there watching it. So I had to sit home and watch all this stuff. And look, they threw everything against the wall and saw what would work. Like you say, though, the nice part all these decades later, I can not look at it ever again, but I can look at Wembley Stadium
Right.
anytime. The day everything started to change for the better. So give me that. I think they discovered they didn't have to reach so hard if they had good talent, just let them work. Now you can watch a Cody Rhodes CM Punk match or something like that and even forget how they got into the ring. Just watch them work.
Yeah.
That's worth the ticket dollar. That's worth tuning in for.
And
You
who
know what I'm
knows?
saying? You
Yeah.
don't have to be that desperate.
And who knows? Maybe if they had never done a lot of those really garbage gimmicks, that the Papa Shangos and the Roccos, they would never have known that, what, they really need to stick with the Bret Hart stuff and the Davey Boy Smith. And, I put it to you this way. If somebody asks me, a wrestling fan says 1992 WWF, what's the first thing that comes to mind? To be completely honest, the very first thing that hits my mind is Bret Hart and SummerSlam. with Davey Boy Smith. That's just the thing that, automatically pops into my head. Now, unfortunately, the thing that pops into my head right after that would be the scandals and the Donahue show and all that. That's just me. So it's like the highest of highs and the lowest of
Most of
lows
lows
for
all at
them,
the same time.
Yeah.
But,
So there's that.
there's one more thing I think we have to bring up, and then we'll say goodbye to our people here. If it wasn't for people like Shawn Michaels and Bret Hart becoming major stars, we would not have Cody Rhodes today as a champion. We would not have CM Punk as a main guy. Maybe even, a lot of the top 10, Sami Zayn. They're smaller. They're not as
Yeah.
muscular.
Yep.
But before that period, it was all Warlord and Barbarian and Road Warriors and Hogan and, and if it wasn't that type of guy, it was a guy like Earthquake.
Right.
They had to be giants. They had to be big, 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 huge. I think that the Davey Boy versus Brett match ushered in a year of this. Well, maybe the size isn't all that important if we can get the personalities over or show how good they are. I think it was just healthy all the way around. All I know is this, like you say, that SummerSlam match was real important. Top 10 all time. If you list the top 10 matches that I think were the most important that I've seen in my lifetime, it's definitely in there. There's no question about it. It's not even nothing even close to say no to that one.
And I believe that's to this day, I believe Brett calls that his favorite match of all time.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure. Yeah, it's that match. And I mean, look, there's a lot of Bret Hart matches to pick from. I mean, we know that. I mean, he's had a hell of a career. So for him to actually name that match, and I don't know if people, listening to the listeners who haven't, I'm sure all the listeners obviously have seen that match, but maybe a lot of them haven't watched it in a while. I mean, it's not that it's quite a while ago now, 1992. So if you haven't watched that match in a while, watch it again, watch it now, and just look at the emotion. I mean, we talk about the skills and the moveset. Yeah, of course, those guys were incredible, especially for that time. But I mean, you look at the emotion in the crowd, and you see the way that building, or I should say, that stadium popped when that result came. I mean, that was incredible. I still to this day think it's one of the best pops ever.
For the era, it's right up there with Kerry Von Erich beating Ric Flair.
Yeah, absolutely.
It really is. We talked about that recently too. And it's like something that transcended a win or a loss and even who was involved. It just felt special, felt important. And that's what you need in wrestling. You need something to feel important.
Moments. Yep.
Yeah, you need it. You need it. You need that level of realism. There was a logic behind why that match came about between Davey Boy and Bret Hart. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
You need to have it. And if you stray too far from it, like I say, and all the three other things that are going on, that's what turned the old timer fans off in the old days. I'm pretty sure. Those were the people who stopped going to the Garden. Like I said, when I saw Jerry Lawler there and they only had 7,700 people in the building, it was all kids. It was all parents and kids.
Yeah.
The people who I had seen in the same seats forever were no longer there anymore. They all stopped watching. So there's a lesson to be learned from wrestling promotions. And I think all of today's promotions need to look back at this period because it could happen to you.
Sure. I agree. And you're right. It's that probably was right around that period where the fan base was changing. I know what I mean. I know what you mean. I mean, you watch those old shows and you see the same fans in the crowd. You see, especially in the first few rows, you see a lot of the same faces. And then all of a sudden it started changing and there were different demographics and different people, different faces. You didn't see the same faces all the time. And little by little, it kind of, it transitioned to a whole new crowd.
John McAdam of the Stick to Wrestling podcast on Arcadian Vanguard Network on this show put it best. And I quote him all the time. I quote him in the book I'm writing right now. There is no resemblance between a WWF match in January of 1980 and one in December of 1989. Things changed that much that fast. All you need to do is watch a tape from 1980 and watch a tape from 1989.
Oh,
two
100%.
entirely different things. And John nailed it. He just nailed it.
100%. You can't even, and in that sense, you can't even refer to the decade of the 80s as like, oh, the 80s had these type of fans, because it was really separated into two parts. And you had that early 80s was completely different than the late 80s period, and not just WWF, but, elsewhere as well. Completely agree with that.
I will forever say, and I guess they couldn't do it anymore, but what hurt New York, I think, was the fact that they weren't promoting monthly anymore. It was felt special. You got to be there every Monday, first Monday in every month. And they stopped doing it sometime in the 80s. And I think they had to because they went national. It didn't seem as much of a priority anymore. They had to worry about San Antonio and Philadelphia, So look, I miss the old days like everybody else does. I'm sure you do too, to an extent. Probably more, as much as I do in a different kind of way, even though you're younger than I am. But we love our wrestling, and we love wrestling on our wrestling, and that's all I'll say. Joe, good to see you again. Nice conversation. Really enjoy having you here. A fellow Carvel maven, and Carvel's been in the news. We saw the ghost of Tom Carvel on Facebook recently. Thank you, Howard Baum.
I did see that. I got a huge chuckle out of that.
If you folks haven't seen it, if you're on Facebook, go to Howard Baum and see the adventures of the ghost of Tom Carvel. You will bust your sides. I'm telling you.
And Bob, while you brought up Carvel, I wasn't going to ask, but I will say I did on social media this last few weeks. I tagged you. Did you see that there's that flavor butter cookie soft serve?
Yes, I saw
it. Have you tried this yet?
Do you know who you're talking to? Mr. Vanilla? I am Mr. Vanilla.
Yeah, but you went out of your comfort zone a little bit there in the last few months.
No, because they put chocolate syrup on my vanilla.
Yeah, there you go. That's big for you. No, I'm saying I
the very concept of that, it just doesn't work for me. You know what though? I want to try, in your honor, because I've never had it. They're strawberry.
Oh yeah, no, that's good. But
I want to try. I recently had chocolate, by the way.
Yeah, I know.
I went for vanilla chocolate, and next time I go, I'm going to try the strawberry.
But wait a minute, let me just backtrack for a second. You have no interest in trying the why not?
I have no interest in putting a tutu on and joining the ballet either. What a second. What? I think what? What is it? Butter what?
But like butter, you know butter cookies, right? Wasn't it like butter cookies?
Yeah, Christmas time. Every Christmas you get butter cookies.
Don't you think that would translate really well into a soft serve?
For some, yeah. For me, I will I will plots. I don't have any interest in those. I'll put it this way. No, you know me. I like butter cookie.
Bob, you got to go a little bit. This is like equal to, you said your name is so plain and generic,
plain.
Bob Smith. That's how you like your ice cream. I mean, you got to
I like my everything like that. I like my meat plain. I don't like sauce on it. I like mashed potatoes with nothing on them.
You're one of those people that you want to get a plain slice of pizza. You don't want anything on it.
No, I get toppings on pizza.
Okay, at least
I do get toppings on pizza.
Yeah.
Today I had pizza. I had some toppings on it. Oh, you ever had a Brooklyn slice? Oh, baby.
Yeah.
You know what's on it? Everything. Everything.
Yeah, I love that.
If you can name a pizza topping, it's on that slice. Delicious. Luigi's Pizzeria in New Hyde Park. Thank you. That was my lunch today.
Luigi's? Okay.
Luigi's. Very, very good. Very good. New Hyde Park. Or it may technically be Mineola, but
okay.
It's good. It's good.
Now
we better shut up. We better shut up.
Yeah, now I'm really hungry.
Well, I hope you're hungry for some great wrestling talk, because we have a wonderful guest in James Dixon. He will be here in about 35. No, he's going to be here. Count to 9.5, I always say, because I'm going to put a musical adjoiner here. Enjoy the dulcet tones of this instrumental that lasts 9 seconds, and we will be right back. Well, it's book time again on the show. Our previous book episodes did very, very, very well. So we have a very prolific author here, and also somebody you probably know for you magazine readers. It's James Dixon of Inside the Ropes. He has a new book coming out, and we'll get into all that. James, this is my first transatlantic podcast, so welcome to the show.
Oh, wow. I'm honored. Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
No problem at all. Could you give my listeners who may not have heard of you or may not have access to Inside the Ropes here at newsstands here in the United States, could you give them a rundown on Inside the Ropes and just talk about, I believe your new book is the second in a series of books, book number 1 of the second series. Am I right about that?
Yeah. It's the first of a new trilogy of books. I released the original trilogy of books about a decade ago now, and that covered 95 to 98, specifically focused on the WWF at the time, but WCW as well. And, it was very much the story of how Vince McMahon rebuilt things post-Hogan, and this one's going back and looking a little bit before that, the prequel, if you will. So as for Inside the Ropes, we launched the magazine in 2020. It was a terrible time to launch a magazine right in the middle of COVID. But we decided there was just not enough magazines anymore. We all grew up loving magazines, everyone in the team. We remember in the UK, Power Slam magazine and Superstars of Wrestling magazine, and tons that used to get imported from the US, and they were just completely gone, as well as the official promotion magazines. WWE stopped doing theirs. We thought that was a real shame, and it was very much a case of we want to preserve the history of wrestling, and that's kind of our role now. That's what we try and do between the various books that we do, the magazine that we do, and various other things. I think it's very important not to lose sight of history.
Well, I'll tell you what, your new book, let's go on about the new book. It's called Titan Shrinking, How Wrestling Muscle Lost His Power. Great title. I was with, and this is all about the year of 1992, and I was with Pro Wrestling Illustrated in 1992 as managing editor at that point. Yeah, you're right. I mean, I have not finished your book. I am in the midst of perusing it, but I'll tell you what, you're nailing it on so many different factors. Working a wrestling magazine in the day got depressing because all we were getting hit with between, I'd say, 92 and 93 was bad news. The product was bad and the news was worse. And I think your book really brings it out like no book I've seen has yet.
Well, thank you. I mean, that was certainly my intention. It's very much one of those years that people have wrote a lot about and spoke a lot about, but there's so much happens in such a very condensed period of time. And I feel it's very difficult to get a simple narrative and a simple overarching view of what happened in 92 if you're unfamiliar. If unlike us, you didn't live through it happening. And very much my goal was to put it all together and make it make sense to the modern fan, or for fans who did live it, but maybe aren't fully aware of the structure and the layout of events and how condensed some of them really were. So that's very much what I was going for. But as you say, that 1992 was such a crazy year in terms of news. It was all bad news, for Vince McMahon especially. He was putting out fires almost every single day, it seemed, between sex scandals and steroid scandals and all of his big stars from the peak era leaving, and as well as trying to create new stars, but then having to deal with doing that without his right-hand men, so he was a bit of a loose cannon for a little while there. But then there's the really fascinating juxtaposition, which is as it's collapsing in the US, the business, in the UK and Europe, it's never been bigger. And that's one of the really interesting parts of 92 from my perspective. And certainly in terms of as a UK-based fan and writer as I am, I think it's important to tell the story of how the WWF boomed in the UK. Because I think maybe overseas, for all, American fans and such are aware of it, maybe not as aware of it as they should be, was my opinion. So that was definitely the goal, to explain all of that and make it all make sense to people.
I see. Well, you talk about WWF, as it was called in those days, bringing in stars from other places, but then they would bring them in and change them. So they weren't the stars. Jacques Rougeau became the Mountie. I mean, Barry Darsow became the Repo Man. Mike Rotundo became IRS. Papa Shango, Nails. Steve Kern became Skinner, but he actually liked that role. He was an actual Skinner, so that helped all. Rick Martel became the Mountie. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It's like they would import the best talent they could and alter them. I don't think it worked all that well here, but maybe it was better in where you were.
I think there's obviously the reason Vince does that is so he can own it, because he's a control freak and he wants to own everything and be able to, tie those IPs down for life. And some wrestlers find in the modern era when there's certain things they're still not allowed to do. And it's just the way Vince does things. It's all about control, right? And I agree. I don't think a lot of that stuff did work. And the ones that did work tended to be the ones he didn't really change too much, or the ones who eventually escaped those clutches, like Steve Austin, for example, a little bit later on, obviously. But, when he's the ringmaster and that's Vince's great idea for him, Steve has to fight out of that and survive, the terrible name and gimmick for a little while before he comes through the other side. And some guys were able to do that and other guys weren't able to do that. But interestingly, in 92, despite all of these gimmicks, I mean, you listed a bunch of them, and there's a whole bunch more, Max Moon and Nails, and so, there's plenty of them. And yet the guys who really came to the forefront in 92 Ric Flair, Randy Savage, Bret Hart, guys, Shawn Michaels, like guys he didn't really touch at all, who were very much just themselves, turned up a few notches. And I think that's really fascinating, because what Vince does do, and it's prevalent throughout the book, is as he's trying to find an answer to Hogan leaving, he looks at gimmicks, very much silly characters, and just throws everything at the wall, trying to find something that works for his next big heel, for his next babyface. And nothing does. And, and it's very much unfiltered Vince. And he'd been doing that in 91 a little bit, he kind of got a little bit crazier in 91, having Ultimate Warrior locked in a casket, having Jake Roberts set his Cobra on Randy Savage, the whole Sergeant Slaughter Iraq sympathizer thing. That was very much not family entertainment like it had been a few years earlier, I think. And in 92, without Pat Patterson there for a while and without Bruce Pritchard there for a while, that's when he starts coming up with all these wild angles that just, didn't really work at all. And it's eventually when those two guys come back and then he settles on Brett, things calm a little bit in that regard, but never truly went away, because he was still doing that right through to 96, 97.
Yeah, I just remember back then the introduction of the Nails character, right? And his intro on the syndicated programs was Big Boss Man is in the ring, and Nails just beats the hell out of him for 5 minutes. There was no art to it. There was no story, that was really delivered at that point. This stranger just showed up and beat the hell out of him. It was ugly. And I think the Papa Shango stuff was just, it was too much. It was too cartoonish. So you had this ultra violence on 11 o'clock in the morning here in the States, as well as the silliness of the horror thing. It got so desperate, man.
The Nails thing, I think it's an interesting one, that one, because I think from my perspective, I was 8 years old at the time, and I found Nails really frightening. And really intimidating, because I don't think there'd really been a beatdown like that on WWF television. As you say, it's a family-friendly TV show, and yet you've got this guy just coming out and just beating him relentlessly, because it was a long beatdown, and they did things. This is in the book. Some of the things Nails describes about that angle, where he used the nightstick, and Bossman was wearing a knee brace. So he made sure he hit the knee with the knee brace on as hard as he could, because he knew it wouldn't hurt him, but it'd make this terrible, thwacking sound. And it sounds like he's broke his leg. It's vicious. It's vicious. And then the follow-up to that, where they had Bossman with all the makeup on and the bruising and sort of him calling in from home, but really he was out getting liposuction. That's the real reason he was off TV. But but it was so effective. And I think Nails probably, he gets a terrible sort of reputation, I think, and gets listed as one of those silly gimmicks. But I think he was a really intimidating character, and probably quite a good heel character for them to have at the time. He certainly was more believable, because an escape con or an ex-con, you can believe, certainly more than a voodoo priest or a magic undead wizard.
Yeah, the motivation, and, Kevin Kelly's a good wrestler, and the motivation was correct, but the way it was played out, I do think went a step too far with he's still wearing his prison garb. Why? Number two, he had a modulated voice. When he did interviews with him, it was a computer modulated voice. It wasn't his real voice. So I think they had a good idea done wrong in my eyes. I don't know.
I think with the jumpsuit, I would agree with that. But then you have to look at the rest of the roster and go, why is the Big Boss man? Why is the policeman wrestling in his policeman outfit? Why is why is the sumo guy wrestling in his sumo gear? It's just silly WWF cartoon stuff, isn't it? It's so you can see the silhouette and know who it is straight away, I guess. But I do get what you're saying. Obviously, it's a million miles removed from certainly modern day wrestling, but definitely from the WWF a few years later when it became a bit more adult themed. So. Yeah, I do agree, but they'd kind of always been like that.
What do you personally think were the worst aspects of 1992 in the WWF?
The worst aspects were behind the scenes, I would think, rather than on screen. So on screen, obviously, they had lost a lot of talent, and the roster seemed very small, both in a physical sense because they'd all come off the steroids, but also in an actual sense because they'd lost so many guys and they didn't have any star power. And that hurt for sure. But it was behind the scenes where it really was collapsing. The sex scandal was terrible, but completely ignored by the authorities because they were so obsessed with nailing Vince for the steroid trials. So that's covered in the book in quite a lot of detail, specifically why Mel Phillips was able to get away with what he got away with and was never prosecuted. And it's very much because the FBI looked into him. They had evidence to convict him, but they decided what they wanted to do. Because Vince and the WWF were paying for the legal representation for any wrestler who might testify, they would all be testifying on the WWF side. And the feds wanted someone from inside the WWF to testify against Vince. And they went to Mel Phillips with the plan that they would make him do a bargaining deal with them. He would get away with everything he'd done if he would testify against Vince, because they didn't care about the sex allegations. They just wanted Vince in jail, make an example of him. And unfortunately for them, Mel Phillips wasn't there when they went to visit him, and that was the end of that. They just left it and dropped the investigation. And I think that kind of thing is probably not that well known, and that kind of thing I think is just crazy. The things that were going on like that, and WWF getting away with things like a drug raid in St. Louis because I think Blackjack Lanza had been tipped off an hour before, so all the guys flushed their stashes, before they arrived, and it was this real bungled mess of a raid, and but there's all these things, and Vince decided to launch a bodybuilding promotion at the time when steroids are a big problem for him. I mean, that's just such a Vince McMahon thing to do. And yet, all of this was distracting him. And like we've already talked about the silly gimmicks, but it meant what was happening on screen didn't really resonate at all. And as you lived through, it did collapse in the buildings and on TV and pay-per-view.
It really did. I could not believe locally here. Like I said, I've always been in the New York City area, and I went to a card right around that point. I would go to some cards, and I'll tell you what, at one point, MSG, which was always the strong bed for decades from the era of Bruno Sammartino on, was doing half houses.
Yeah.
In New York. That was almost unthinkable, but there were two aspects for that, I think. Number one, they used to play every single month at Madison Square Garden. It was a monthly tradition. When that tradition ended, I think a lot of the older fans stayed home. And secondly, product wasn't good. The product was really waning. I remember that time, I think I went to, in my capacity with PWI, I went to a card in Philadelphia for the NWA. It only drew 800 people. So things were really down in 92, not just for the WWF.
I think there's a few reasons for that. It's overexposure is definitely one of them. If you give people the same thing at that point, the WWF had been, going sort of national for about 7, 8 years. So they'd seen it. The kids who started watching 84, 85, 86, they'd grown up into teenagers and they were still getting the same thing, shoved down their throats with Hogan until 92. And after a while, no matter what it is, you eat your favorite meal every day, you're going to get sick of it. And it's a very similar thing. People do talk about wrestling being cyclical. That's true to a point, but only really because the promoters aren't quick enough to change with the times, I think. So, it's more to do with that than anything. And with the NWA as well, it was similar. That they had an opportunity really to take advantage of the WWF falling, but didn't do that. They went backwards with Bill Watts, and that was, I think, a mistake. I think if they'd have done what they did a couple of years later and really gone for it, they had a real good chance of taking over the WWF while it was struggling, but they didn't do that. They didn't take advantage of that. And wrestling, it had been such a big thing. It had been so big. And obviously wrestling's been around a long, long time, and there's been a lot of, peaks and valleys. But in terms of sort of on a global scale, and certainly a national scale, it had never been as big as in the 80s, I would argue. And Hulkamania was a national thing, an international thing. It was mainstream. It was pop culture. And that eventually will wear out, like anything popular. These things do eventually just fade and wane. And if you think of the great, popular TV shows, I mean, you're in New York, right? I mean, Friends is a good example of this. The first couple of series of Friends were huge, and then it drops and drops and drops. People are still watching, but it's not what it was. Everyone in the street used to be talking about Ross and Rachel, but 3-4 years later, when Friends is still going, no one's really talking about what happened on. And I think wrestling's very, very similar. Overexposure of it, and the same thing over and over again, and just a natural sort of cycle.
Wrestling's always been peaks and valleys. Even when the product was samey in the 60s and 70s, you'd have territories that were doing great, and just they would suddenly drop off and come back up. Sometimes it's, back in the territory days, we had a lot of top name wrestlers here that would move from place to place. And it would hurt sometimes. Like when Dusty Rhodes at his peak was doing Florida, he was Florida wrestling. And when he left to go to the East Coast, their attendance dropped in less than half of what they were drawing. So I think sometimes it's just a matter of, when what you really enjoyed goes away, you don't like the replacement.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it makes, in the territory days, obviously it was a little bit different in the sense that if somebody left, you could bring someone else in from a different territory. They'd be fresh, they'd be new, right? But and sometimes, as you say, it wouldn't work. Sometimes it would. But in the WWF, it was a bit of a closed shop, because you'd seen everybody. And if you're going to bring someone else in, where are you bringing them from by 92? In the 80s, it was easy for Vince. He could go through all the territories. He could pick the top stars. And, so he'll go to Quebec and get Dino Bravo and Jacques Rougeau. And then he'll go and get the Hearts from Calgary and whoever, Randy Savage from ICW and whatever. Obviously, by 92, Vince had pretty much killed the territories. The AWA is gone. NWA is still around, but it's much harder to get their guys, in the same way as it was in the 80s. He doesn't have that feeder system. The territories were his feeder system. And obviously, in modern times, he's made his own feeder systems, and it's worked quite well for them, but because he recognized it. But in 92, he hadn't caught up to that fact yet. He hadn't realized there was nowhere to get talent. So then he starts bringing in, and I don't like to sort of knock anybody, but an example would be Damien Demento. So he was Mondo Clean on the Indies, and he was, not exactly a top level star, right? Interesting gimmick, I guess, but he doesn't seem like someone who's going to be your next star. But that's what Vince was having to draw on, guys like that who weren't proven in any territory, never drawn any money, never been on TV. And he just had to sort of, again, like we say, throw them at the wall and hope it worked. And in most cases it didn't. And whereas in the past he could have got Randy Savage in, and, he could have got Barry Windham in, or he could have got all these different people from different places. The Dingo Warrior comes in, he repackages him slightly, becomes a big star, and he doesn't have that. So he's scrambling, and that's the difference. And obviously in 92 as well, it was the first time Vince really had to scramble in that way, because he'd had a pretty consistent roster from 85 through 91. Obviously people came and went, but the core was very much the same. Whereas by 92, he loses Hogan, Piper, Jake, Warrior, Davey Boy, the Legion of Doom, the Warlord, the Barbarian, Haku, Hercules. There's a whole host of wrestlers that disappear for various reasons. Some of them for steroids, some of them for, they were just finished, they were going elsewhere, or they were done with wrestling, whatever it might be. And we find that in sports. I mean, certainly, I don't know what it's like in US sports, but in the UK with football or soccer, if a team sells 5, 6, 7 players and brings new ones in, it takes a while before that works and gels. And sometimes it never does. Sometimes you've lost it, and that's it. And it's a similar thing. It's very hard to change so much at once.
It is. But I'll tell you what, I forget what year Jerry Lawler entered the WWF.
That was late 92, yeah.
Okay, late 92, exactly. That same card I told you about, he made his MSG debut as a regular, and he brought the house down. He did old school Memphis Heat. He gets in the ring. They play the King's music. He insults the crowd. The crowd is hating him before they even locked up. And he did a traditional Memphis style match where, he held the ropes and pinned Tito Santana at the same time. And then they brawled a little bit through the crowd, which they never did in New York. Well, one appearance of something old school and effective, he was over like crazy with that very first appearance. So that's how things had changed so much. He brought back a little bit of that old school heel bit, and it went over like gangbusters because they hadn't done it in a few years.
Well, he was kind of the last one as well, the last vestige of the territory who'd held out and refused to go there. And Vince actually, as well as, coming up with all these crazy characters, he does sort of turn to the past in 92 as well, because he brings in sort of Bam Bam Bigelow and Kamala, who have been there before, big monster heels to feed to his new baby face he's trying to push. But then he also brings back Bob Backlund, which was such a a strange hire. When you think about what the WWF was becoming and the direction it was going, because the WWF in 92 is a million miles away from the WWF in 82, as I'm sure you remember. And, Backlund was such the opposite of Hogan, really, in many ways, in terms of a character. But I think what Vince was hoping for was to counter exactly the problem you said there, like in New York, which is obviously that's where he figures it out, right? Like if it's drawn in New York and it's working in New York, it'll work everywhere. And they weren't drawn in New York. So bringing back Backlund, who's proven as a draw many times over in New York in the previous era, made a lot of sense on paper. But obviously in practice, it was a really difficult thing for Bob.
Well, you know what's true too. I was there when Backlund made his return match at MSG, and the fans loved him, and they saved the match for the last thing on the show. Fans were really seemed happy, but from what I understand from Bill Apter, who was our conduit to all the other arenas back then, it didn't mean anything anywhere else. Yeah. I mean, Backlund was showing up; he was not going over in that character at all, which led eventually to the heel Backlund, which was out of left field. Nobody expected that, but by the same token, it just showed you the audience in that short amount of time, from the time Backlund left and the time he came back, was a totally different audience.
Yeah, 100%. And I think it was a completely different audience in 92 than it was in 85, 86, 87 as well. I think it had grown and evolved. And being a kid at the time is quite useful for me when putting this book together, because I experienced the WWF at its peak where everybody, loved it. In 92, it was all anyone talked about in the playground. It was all about SummerSlam. It was all about Brett and Davey. And that's all anyone talked about for weeks and weeks and weeks. Everybody, right? A couple of years, or maybe 6 months later, maybe a year later, nobody was talking about wrestling anymore. And because those people who loved it had disappeared, they'd moved on to other things. They got a little bit older and moved into sport or video games or whatever. And I think that happens with a lot of fans. Some people stay, like us, but not everybody does. And I think, again, that's a similar thing, with wrestling in general. I think people like it for a little bit and then they move on to something else. And, you're left with your hardcore fan base, which is pretty much what they were down to in 92, 93.
John McAdam hosts another podcast in the wrestling world called Stick to Wrestling. And he made the best quote about the 1980s. We'll go back a little bit. In that he said, and I'm paraphrasing, the wrestling you saw in the WWF in January 1980 bared no resemblance at all to the wrestling you saw in December 1989. Meaning, in the course of that decade, the style, the fan base, everything changed in that 10-year period. And I think it was the best explanation I've ever heard of the rapid change of promotional style and the rapid change of the fans who were actually attending. If you looked at a Madison Square Garden card from 1980, it was mostly adults and a lot of older people. If you look at it in 89, it was kids and families and an entire different fan base. It was remarkable to watch. It was remarkable to think about. Just, and I started working in the business at the tail end of the 80s, and he was right. I mean, even our magazines at Peterborough, we changed it and softened them because the audience was different.
And the same applies, I think, if you look at, the very start of 90 and the very end of 99, what a difference that is as well. It evolves, and wrestling does. Wrestling changes and evolves. I mean, I imagine if you were to show fans from 1980 the modern product now, they'd be appalled in many ways,
right.
Unless they've stuck with it, this whole time. And I think people have their favorites. People like what they grew up watching, and when it changes, they turn off. And I certainly, even though I still work in the industry and and with the magazine, things like that, and the books, and do have to watch the modern product, I would much rather not. As good as it is in the ring, I would still take what I grew up watching first and foremost. And I'm sure you're the same with whatever era. There must be an era that you would look back on and go, yeah.
Oh, yeah. The 70s for me. 70s for me is my sweet spot. But then again, I equate pro wrestling to popular music too. I think that the stuff that brought you to the dance, the stuff that got you into it, will always be your favorite era, no matter what happens afterwards. I mean, I still listen to the songs and bands that I listened to when I was in high school and love them the best. It's just the way it works, I think, with the aging process. Would you agree with that? Or
100%. I mean, I assume you're like me in that modern music just sounds like noise, right? And
it's not noise. It's just I think modern music has lost its soul.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I think people buy artist personas instead of songs now.
And is it
I really do.
like the way that.
Well, yeah, true. That's a good analogy because it's like, yeah. I mean, each wrestler in WWE now comes out and they have their own individualized ring entrance.
Own logos, own entrances, own ring apron, gimmicks, graphics, everything. They've all got their own unique pose, taunt, or whatever you call it these days, and their own chants. And, everything's very much, they are brands within themselves, within this bigger overarching brand. And, it's a lot more cut and paste now, I think, than it used to be. A lot less individual. As bizarre as that sounds, when everyone's unique in that sense of having their own stuff, I think there's a lot less room for originality because everything's, predetermined in the sense of when a guy comes out, he's going to stand and pose and look at the camera in a certain way. He's going to do, he's going to turn a certain way. He's going to do whatever he's going to do. Whereas it felt a lot more natural in the 70s, 80s and prior to that, I think.
But in a way, the introductions in WWE now are dancing because they come out, they're waiting for the cues in their own musical themes. Like Dustin Rhodes will pound the ground on a certain note in the song, and then the fireworks go at the same time.
Right. Yeah.
It's all choreographed. It's almost like not particularly soulful. It's all rote. You watch that 150 times, and it's like, oh, this again. You know what I'm saying? It's just unnatural. You don't really know the person. You know the product.
Right, and it's very much the modern era. I think it is like that, unfortunately, but it also works for the modern fan, because you're giving them the greatest hits. If you go and see WWE, you want to see John Cena do certain moves, do certain poses, do certain whatever. You want it to look like you saw on the TV last week. You want it to, whereas I think fans cared more about seeing the performers rather than the specific act that the performers perform, in the past. So I think that's the difference. We do sound like old men complaining about this, though, Bob.
Oh, that's what we're here for, though. We're outdated, right?
Right.
And I'll tell you what. All pro sports in the United States now, I don't know how it is where you are, but all pro sports arenas and stadiums are like being locked inside a video game now. Lights and explosions and choreographed things. When a batter in baseball hits a home run, the lights flash on and off. And it's like, I always thought baseball was supposed to be pastoral and quiet, but now it's as noisy as any other sport. NFL and the NBA is just an ear-jarring mess. I mean, so I don't know how things are presented where you are, but here it's almost like the game is incidental to the merchandising and the overall experience. It's not a game anymore. It's an experience.
Yeah. I mean, I once heard WWE described, and this is, it's kind of like the example you gave earlier that really crystallized something for me and shone a spotlight on the reality of things, which is WWE is not a wrestling company. It is a touring merchandise company. Mm-hmm. And when you look at it that way, it all makes sense. Why do they need to go out and do something different or, reinvent the wheel or, work with other companies or any of this stuff? Like they're doing their thing, which is we want to sell as much content as we can. And obviously it used to be in the stands and now it's with TV companies or streaming services or other nations as well, I guess. They're selling their brand too. And it works pretty well for them. It's easy to criticize them as a fan, but from a business perspective, they do it very, very, very effectively.
Oh yeah, us old timers are complaining about ticket prices in the general experience, but they fill 2 football stadiums for every major PLE event. So who am I to say they're doing it wrong? I can't up to this point.
That's it.
I can't. I mean, as of January of this year, they were printing money. I've never seen them so successful as they were then. Can I ask you something? I know we're off topic about the book, but sure. I want to ask you one more question about the current WWE. American fans now, when they want to watch WWE, when they see the individual PLEs or SmackDown or Monday Night Raw, they're all on different places now. It used to be they were all in one centralized location, USA Network usually for all of their stuff. Now you really have to kind of dig to figure out what's on what channel, and it confused a lot of fans here and angered more because they can't get all of the stations, particularly the new ESPN deal that they have. Is it the same where you are now in terms of fan resentment, or is anybody up in arms over all the different platforms that they're on?
No, man, in the UK, it's never been easier. Everything's on Netflix and that's it.
Really?
Yeah. It's always been quite easy over here. So our cable TV, used to be Sky Sports, which was what WWE used to be on for a long, long time. Then that changed to something called BT Sports, which is now TNT Sports. And that was annoying because it was a lot more expensive. And I think that really hurt the WWE over here in terms of popularity, because far fewer people watched it. Because they would, if you had Sky Sports, you'd also have all the football, and that's huge over here, right? But you didn't really have as much with BT Sports, so that hurt. But then when Netflix takes over from it, Netflix is real easy. Netflix is real cheap as well. Compared, it's maybe a third of the price at most of those others, and you get everything. You get, as well as all the historic stuff, not as much as the network, obviously, but you get all the pay-per-views or PLEs, and you get Raw, you get SmackDown, you get NXT. Whereas before, you would get, even on BT Sport, you would get the TV shows, but you'd still need the network to watch the pay-per-views. So you still had to have that as well. So it was an extra cost. But it's much easier now. Yeah, I mean, we're over the moon about it.
American fans were all up in arms with the ESPN announcement, I guess, a couple of months ago that they're going to do a lot of them there because it's a separate service. It's not regular ESPN. It's an app.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And older fans aren't happy with apps. They don't want to pay for something else. You know how it goes. So
I'm with you. I'm with them.
Listen, there isn't anything that isn't going up right now in terms of cost here in America. I don't know what to say, but that's just the way it is as we're talking. But speaking of costs, I want to go over your trilogies of books. Please explain to our fans here, in case they haven't heard of you, about your first trilogy, what's in those books, and the fact that your new book is a part of a second 3-book trilogy.
Yeah. Okay. So essentially, just over a decade ago, I wrote the 1995 book, which is the first one, Titan Sinking. I know it's similar, but and that was because there wasn't really a lot out there about the WWF in that year, and I thought, you know what, I'll write it and I'll make it happen, and I did that. I didn't really expect it to do that well, but it ended up becoming an Amazon bestseller in wrestling, and people really loved it. So I was like, well, I guess I better keep going. How do I follow it up? And after I'd wrote the first one, I realized, well, actually, this is a trilogy, because it's all about 95 is post the steroid trial. So it's Vince going, right, I need to come back. I can focus now and concentrate on building the WWF back up. But 95 was the worst year they ever had. So the whole story became more than 95. It became about the WWF's attempts, and Vince McMahon specifically, his attempts to get back to where they were, which leads into 96, and then the start of the Monday Night Wars, which, of course, you're very familiar with, and, the various dramas behind the scenes involving the Clique and them leaving, and then, Brett and Shawn becoming the top guy, and then Hogan turning heel on the other show, and Steve Austin rising to prominence, and all of this stuff happening in 96. That's in the second book, Titan Shattered. And then the final one is, of course, and the name should be pretty obvious because it's 97, is Titan Screwed. And it's all about, everyone's spoke about the Montreal screw job. But this one, I would, in my opinion, it's the most accurate, in-depth, and sort of informative version of what happened, an objective version of what happened in Montreal. I did a lot of research to make sure we can really break down every single aspect of that and make it make sense to people, so we can get rid of all these people have preconceptions, or they have these like false versions of events that they've heard, and I think it's important to tell the real story rather than WWE's official stories of things, or wrestlers' versions, which are always half true at best. So, and then it leads into 98 and the crowning of Steve Austin as the next guy, the new leader of that era, and the WWF obviously takes off and becomes a huge global juggernaut again at that point. So to me, it was done. I told the story. The 3-book narrative was the rise, and and return of the WWF as a prominent major entity. And what more is there to write, because 99, 2000, who cares? It's just them being successful. There's no story there, really. A few little minor dramas here and there, but nothing to fill a book with. And then I just kind of got pestered a lot for 10 years by people who'd read the trilogy going, oh, you should write another Titan. I'm like, yeah, but... And then I realized I need to go backwards. I need to tell people how we got to the point in 95, because as we've discussed, in some detail, 92 was such a ridiculous year. So much happened behind the scenes there. And obviously it then turns into 93, and it's like, well, it's the return of Hogan and but then it's the death of Hulkamania, and this time we really are moving on from Hogan, and then the steroid trial starts to kick in, and that becomes the focus of 94. And I think it's going to be a fun trilogy. The blank pieces of paper staring at me for books 2 and 3 give me a degree of anxiety, but once I start, it'll be fine. I'm looking forward to speaking to people and pulling it all together. It's almost like being a detective. That's the way I describe it. As I've been given all the clues, and it's almost like I've got the big cork board, with all the pins and the various different things, and it's trying to connect it together and separate the sort of wrestler versions that are either misremembered or just lies, with the reality, and piece it all together and make it make sense, while also sprinkling some new things that people maybe don't know.
Well, I'll tell you what. After perusing your book, I just want the listeners out there to know that I'm speaking with an excellent professional writer who knows how to research. I'm as impressed with your research abilities as are your writing style.
Thank you.
These are good books, and there's a reason they have been bestsellers. And the fact that you're literally on your 4th out of 6 on the WWF or WWE, whatever you want to call it. I mean, that's pretty impressive. I was willfully blind to your books until your publicist contacted me, and now I'm an instant fan, so I want you to know that.
Oh, thank you, man. I appreciate it. If I can impress someone like you with your history in the industry, I'm doing something right, I think.
Well, I've been hanging around with so many authors the last 2 years on, I've gotten to know through the show that I'm starting to book myself. And I am probably 3/4 of the way through it already, and it took me about 2 weeks. It's going to be a twofold kind of book. I don't know if I want to rub this up against another author.
Sure, yeah.
Part of it is my very odd life story, and the other part is interspliced with wrestling memories of stuff I don't think people remember. A lot of 70s stuff. I can remember the details of entire cards from the 1970s.
Wow, really?
And yeah, and I think that would be the selling point of what I'm doing, is that you're not going to read this stuff anywhere else. There's nobody left to write it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, to me, that is the kind of book I'd want to read, because it's filling a niche. There's a hole there for something like that. There's a million autobiographies, and they're good fun, and our company does help produce biographies for wrestlers, as well as because we do a few different books, and we do like annual yearbooks, record books essentially as well, and they're all fine, but I think lived experiences and things that you can't find on the internet is the key for a book nowadays.
You know what? I think you hit the same wavelength that I was thinking of when I was trying to figure out what to write about. Ian Douglas, who's another really fun author, has been prodding me to write a book when he discovered my life story, what I had gone through. And he said, just write it. He said, somebody will be interested in it. I said, all right, fine. So Ian is the guy who talked me into doing it. My knees are shaking, and I'm going to start pitching it to several publishers and see if anybody would buy. I'm not as famous as Bill Apter or Brian R. Solomon, though. It's like, I mean, I was like the third banana on my own magazine. So it's, so it's like, will this translate? We shall see. Maybe the podcast will help. We're going on our 4th year in January.
I think so, man. Like, you've got an audience already. You obviously like what you do. I mean, look, I own a publishing company. Send it to me as well. Let's talk off air about it, eh?
I would be most pleased to do that. Because you know what? I'm sitting home. I'm writing. I've never even formatted a book, so my knees are shaking.
Right.
So I can use all the advice I could get.
I mean, we do it. That's the thing with Titan. Like, so we do have a publishing company which obviously produces the magazine, and we do produce a bunch of books. Like, I don't know if you've read Barry Darso's autobiography or Mark Merrow's. We produced those this year. with our publishing company, and we do exclusively at the moment wrestling books, and like I say, we do the yearbooks every year. Like they're probably something you'd really enjoy. I'll send you some over because
oh no, I've seen those. I've
have you
seen those.
seen them? Right? Yeah,
Yeah,
they're
yeah.
good fun. They're good fun because I think wrestling history gets lost and disappears. So
Well,
let's keep it alive as best we can. I guess. So.
You talk about yearbooks. I actually wrote the entire 1991, the very first two PWI 500 articles all by myself.
Oh, did you? Oh man.
Yes.
Wow.
Can you imagine? And let me tell you, my friend, this was pre-internet, pre-cell phones, pre-anything. We worked on an archaic word processing system that was just hooked to itself. There was no outside. So I was doing it with a bunch of paper, my own memory, and a bunch of stacks of wrestling magazines.
Oh, wow. I mean, that is impressive. I mean, I find it difficult when we put the 50. We do a 50 every year in the magazine, and that's hard enough. We're actually putting it together now, and it's only 50, right? So I can't even imagine 10 times as much with, a third of the writers.
I'll just say it was a bear, and I'll leave it at that. It was really, really. But I was young, and I could take the punishment back. I was an old newspaper guy. Newspaper guys work all night long. I was used to it. It didn't even seem unseemly. I was so used to that kind of a grind that it wasn't that awful. I got tired. I got a bonus. Stanley Weston gave me a bonus. So
I should hope he did.
Yeah.
Is that going to be in the book? The story of the fun?
Oh yeah. The whole schmear. Every little thing that I did back in the wrestling magazine days will be in there, and a lot of things that I don't think anybody's ever written about in terms of what it took to put the magazines out.
Oh wow!
Because back in the day, GC London, which published Inside Wrestling, The Wrestler, Pro Wrestling Illustrated, Sports Review Wrestling, and go down the list of all the magazines they did. Their reaction to waning sales was to publish more magazines.
Well, specials,
right? They didn't try to push the current product; they added products. So it was, as much fun as jobs like this are, which you probably attest to. Awesome. It was also, it can be hairy. I mean, a deadline is a deadline. I don't know what you're writing about.
It can be difficult. I mean, it is a great. We're privileged, to be in these positions and doing this for a living, but. It can, it's tricky sometimes, especially with the magazine when we don't have a publishing house. We are the publishing house. If it goes wrong, it's on us. So it can be a lot of pressure, but no, it's good fun. I wouldn't want to be doing anything else,
I pine for my old job. I do. I left there because they moved. I couldn't move with them.
Right.
And they didn't fire me. I didn't quit. I had to find something else. It was a matter of financial expedience back in the day. So all I know is that I felt blessed to even get the job. I mean, 2 years earlier, I was working at my hometown newspaper, but I won a couple of major awards, and it got me the job with PWI. Of course, they were for boxing, and they were about Mike Tyson, and we also published boxing magazines. So There's your guy.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I am a lucky person, and I'm very lucky to have made your acquaintance. I am very impressed with your work. Inside the Ropes, like I say, it's one of the 2 magazines you can find on United States newsstands. I know I see it at the Barnes & Noble book chain here all the time. And I want to thank you for being here. You have opened my eyes to a lot of things, and your book's very good, and it's out now, and I think people should run and get it.
Thank you, man. Yeah, you can get it on Amazon worldwide. That's your best place. So Kindle, if you want to be modern, you can read it on your Kindle, but obviously we prefer the paperback, don't we?
Of course. I have one more question for you before I let you go. Today's stuff.
Yeah.
Does it charm you in any way? Do you enjoy it at times? I am that way. There are certain things that when it's good, it's great now. And when it's bad, it's awful. I can't even. And the problem is it's awful while not being awful I think the problem in my heart and mind after watching for 5 decades is if it doesn't have realism to it, it doesn't work for me. And you can pick up the ball on your statement.
It's difficult for me to watch it through the eyes of a fan because I've been in the industry now for, working in some capacity in the industry for 22 years.
Wow.
And some of that, I wrestled in the UK for 8-9 years. I've promoted, I've worked as an agent / producer, I've obviously wrote about it. I've trained, I've done everything, literally everything you can do in wrestling. I've pretty much done it. So it's very hard to then take that cap off and sit and watch it as a fan. It's like you've seen behind the curtain too much, so it's hard. And everything you see now is just another match, right? It's very hard to really get invested in the same way you would when you grew up really loving it as a fan, I think. And certainly when you were younger, it's very hard to get invested in the same way. And especially when it's like guys who I know, on TV and things, or who I've maybe worked with in the ring and things like that. Like for example, like Drew McIntyre, like I wrestled him a couple of times over here, and he's a good friend, but it's hard to get invested in him as a performer in the same way I would have as with Bret Hart or Hulk Hogan or larger than life superheroes, because he's not. He's just my mate Drew, so it's a little bit different. But I still do appreciate the athleticism. I still think they do some things very well. I think that they tend to pull out, they manage to pull it off at WrestleMania. It looks good. It feels good. It feels special. I loved the Cody title win a couple of years ago. I thought that was done
exactly
brilliantly. It can still be done, but when it's just a million moves, and I won't criticize any particular promotion or wrestlers, but when it's just a million moves and no logic to it, and it's just, going for pops rather than going for drama. I'm a Bret Hart guy. I'm not flippy indie spot fest guy. That's the best way I can describe it.
Shoot, I'm a Bruno Sammartino guy, so the decades rolled on too fast, my friend. This is James Dixon, everybody. He is a pro's pro, and I want to thank you immensely for taking the time out and doing this, because I realize it's evening where you are and it's afternoon where I am, and for you to take the time out on a night like this, I really appreciate it.
Oh, it's been an absolute pleasure. Anytime. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Attention, Gen Xers. If you'd like to explore the era that appeals to you, look no further than GenerationXWire.com. The generation who grew up with the elite in entertainment, music, movies, TV, books, pro wrestling, and more finally has a one-stop destination for all their Gen X needs. From Aerosmith to Batman to the Killer Bees to the Twilight Zone, there's something for everybody at GenerationXWire.com. You won't find a more eclectic mix of pop culture content than at the leading website that specializes in the greatest generation, GenerationXWire.com. Check it out today. I would like to thank you all very much for joining us again on the Outdated Wrestling Hour. Thank you again, James Dixon, a prolific writer if there ever was one. Thank you again, Joe Fuccio, co-host extraordinaire. And thank to all of you for listening, not only tonight, but every time we put a show out. We really appreciate it. We want to thank our Outdated Wrestling Hour fan club members. You can find out how to join that thing on outdatedwrestling.buzzsprout.com. For a nominal fee, you can help perpetuate the ongoing adventures of this show and our sister podcast, The Outdated Entertainment Hour. And it may be out by the time I release this show, but I have a feeling that our next show is going to be a good one. It's old magazines that are defunct, not in print anymore, with two special guests. Brian R. Solomon, he of the Gorilla Monsoon, #1 ranked wrestling book, and Steve Gennarelli of the Stick to Wrestling with John McAdam podcast. You might want to check that one out. Write to us, outdatedwrestling@gmail.com. Find me on Facebook. I'm the only Bob Smith that had the luck to sing with B.B. King, and 10 times to boot. You can find me on every other social media app. On many of them, I'm outdated_Bob. Other times, I'm just plain Bob Smith. Name an app, I'm probably on it for social media. But Facebook is my jam. It's where I do most of my major announcement is on Facebook. So if you're a Facebook person, please check it out. If you're not, please join. I haven't found a better way to promote the show, to be honest with you, on my own in terms of social media. There's probably other ways to do it. Some people put out these little video. I do this too on Instagram. I'll put out a little placard for the show. But we're doing fine the way things are going, so I see no reason to. Yes, I do. If I have any reason I can't help to promote the show, I need to expand my knowledge base in that regard. But we're doing pretty good just as it is. So in any event, we hope you enjoyed the show. As always, pretty soon we're going to have a special guest who is a wrestling magazine legend, but he's not a PWI guy. How do you like that? I'm crossing the threshold into other wrestling magazines. How dare you, Bob? Well, I must. Until next week, this is Bob Smith of the Outdated Wrestling Hour, formerly of PWI. And as I say at the end of every show, quoting Ringo Starr and quoting Jackie DeShannon Sideways. Peace and love, brothers and sisters. Peace and love.